Hello, everyone. We are live for, I think this is the first time since a very long time that I'm doing something like this in real life. I would call it like this, because as you know, you can also do webinars pre-recorded, which of course is way easier and everything can be well produced and everything will just be perfect because you can do edits and all the things. But it's more fun to be live. So I can promise you that perhaps, for example, you might hear some church bells from outside or my baby daughter who is crawling around. And yeah, that's Life is Life, a very famous song from a German band. It's great that you are with us. Today our topic will be speaker placement and room acoustics, the basics of room acoustics, because you can not cover this huge topic within a webinar. I think we could do this for weeks if it's really about deep physics and all of these things. But I think the straightforward things that are really useful in your everyday life, working in a studio, building a home studio, setting up a podcast space, doing editing, or just, wanting to listen to music in the best possible way. If you are a hi-fi enthusiast, then I think these basics will give you a really good basis to start with. I will have a nice presentation for you, of course, done with PowerPoint, but I'll make sure that it's not boring. Because we are live, it's possible that you, of course, leave your comments and ask your questions. And I have a wonderful assistant sitting in Dresden, also in Germany. Tatjana will take care of your questions and she will collect these and we will go through them at the end of the webinar. So at every time, just feel free to type in your questions and then I'll do my very best to answer all of these. If it's not possible, I can already tell you, please just, write us an email to support@genelec.com. You can also reach, for example, our US team under support.usa@genelec.com. And yeah, it's really easy to reach out to us. Great. So I would say let's just start and have a look what's on our list today. I would start asking you a question. And hopefully most of you will have the same answers to this. what are typical problems we have in studios or, in the places we work in, because not all of us are working in studios. Usually we can achieve mixes that work pretty well on the system we did it on and in the room we made the mix in. But the issue could be that it does not translate really good to other rooms and other systems. This is the challenge. A lot of people tell me that they are always fighting with the bass range, and hopefully after this webinar you will know why this is the case and why bass is somehow, as we say in German, der Endgegner. So the evil villain waiting for you at the end of a level. Yeah, bass is not that easy to deal with. Mainly also because of that, a lot of people struggle with EQing, so they are just not really sure about what decisions to make with setting EQs. And also sometimes you are not really sure about depth of field and also imaging. Imaging can be just on the left-right panorama layer, but of course it can also affect immersive or surround if you're working in these formats. So how it should be, this is always the ideal I start with. In an ideal world, and of course we are not living in one, the frequency response of a loudspeaker would look exactly like this. So it would be a flat line somehow. So there would be no changes from the audio source to your ears. And as you might know, for example, if you look at the frequency responses we share in our specs, a good loudspeaker design can come pretty close to that. So usually these are within a window of, let's say, plus minus 1 to 1.5 dBs. This is what's possible with speaker design. But actually, this is only possible in rooms like this, which is an anechoic chamber, a very, very special construction. Usually you don't feel that comfortable in it. A lot of people just, are getting problems after a few minutes because there are actually absolutely no reflections in there. You also don't have a regular floor. You have some kind of a grid construction. And these so-called anechoic chambers are used, for example, by our research and development team to design and to develop speakers and, of course, to evaluate the design itself. Microphones, for example, are also tested in these rooms. But let's face it, you are not working in an anechoic chamber. You are working in a real room. And in a real room, sound gets reflected. That's just a fact. And therefore, unfortunately, this wonderful flat line we saw before will look more like this in a real environment. For example, this is a measurement from my room with my 8341s, which are pretty flat in the anechoic chamber. But if I don't calibrate them and if I don't do anything, they will look like this. So you will see there are two huge boosts. One is around at 60, the other one at around 120 hertz. 120 hertz is a true killer because this is up to 15 dBs more. And and you see what's left of the linear response is only in the higher mids and in the high frequencies. Otherwise, we are having problems. Let's have a look at the visual comparison, because you might have realized that we use visual terms a lot when we talk about sound. So for example, a mix can sound dark or bright. Peter Gabriel's last record, for example, has bright mixes and dark mixes. This is how they are called, although of course the mixes don't sound dark or don't sound bright. It's more about the aesthetics. We are also, for example, tell someone that it's sounding too bright if there are too many heights, for example, or if it's too sharp. So we are used to visual terms. And let's say you are doing, for example, photography and want to make sure that your colors of your photos look similar on the laptop screen, on TVs, or on other screens as well. The only way to make sure that this is properly working is to use a calibrated screen and to have your white balance set. So white must be white. And somehow this is something we should do in sound as well. because if we don't take care of it, our sound can get once more, a visual term can get colored. So for example, you see the same photo here with wrong white balance. So on the left side, it now looks really reddish. On the right side, it's more going to bluish. And this is exactly what's happening the moment we bring speakers into rooms. So the wonderful white speaker we see on the right side, on standing on Genelec, which was linear in the anechoic chamber, which will be linear in the free field, will get colored. So the sound, the playback will get colored the moment we place it in a room. For example, it will sound different in a corner. It will sound different if it's close to a wall. And it will also sound different, for example, if there is a distance to a wall of, let's say, 1 meter. And we'll have a look at this. And yeah, years ago, we already said challenge accepted. So, a speaker that is brilliant in an anechoic chamber is cool to have, but it's not really helping the customer. And therefore, we wanted to make sure that our speakers have some intelligence. And this is why we invented SAM. This is the so-called Smart Active Monitoring concept, which uses DSPs in the speakers and our GLM software, the Genelec Loudspeaker Manager, to calibrate the speaker exactly to your listening position in your room, and trying to make sure that you can compensate for the influences of the room. Yeah, I'm saying trying to compensate because it's not possible to compensate all of these. This is also part of the room acoustics part then. But we tried our best that it's possible for you that the speaker adapts to your room. And some of you might know, because we had just a nice anniversary last year, that we already started in 78. And of course, in 78, we did not have that many DSPs out there. So we used other stuff like trimmers, for example, a bass control, mid control, treble control. But this was exactly the same task already, because physics don't change, they always stay on version 1.0. So the physics in 78 had been exactly the same as in 25 and probably also in 3112. So we had to compensate for these influences, and we had these trimmers. A next step then was dip switches. And this is something I think some of you will use or should use if you are using our analog models from the 8000 series, because these dip switches can also do basic adjustments. We have this small graph here always showing, what is the function of each dip switch. And in the end, I will also share 2 videos with you that you can just watch and hopefully enjoy. And I show you, for example, how to use the free software Room EQ Wizard for adjusting these dip switches to get a linear or almost linear response from your speaker. And in 2006, in 2006, a hard word for German, we then introduced the first SAM models, which had the option that you can calibrate them automatically using a microphone and using the DSP filters in the speakers. And just that you have seen this, within 18 years, we had only 2 hardware devices. So we started with the device on the left side, which was a network adapter and a microphone. And since GLM3, we are using our recent kit, which is still usable for our latest version, which is now GLM5. If you have not upgraded yet, you can do this. You can find the installer under My Genelec in your account. And also, just as a short overview, this is not a webinar about SAM. This is how it works. So we have the network adapter. We connect our network adapter to the computer running the GLM software. And then we just run CAT cables to all of our speakers and subwoofers. And what's cool about SAM and GLM is that, you're not limited to stereo or stereo with sub. You can have, if you like, up to 80 speakers at the moment. So really huge immersive systems can be calibrated within minutes. And it's really reliable, it's fast. And because it's a built-in solution, so the DSPs are in the speakers, it's no added latency. And if you like to, you can also just store the settings to the speakers and get rid of all the network cabling. And then it's just, ready to go system without any further complex stuff. But now to our today's topic, because I can already tell you there will be more webinars, of course, and then we have different topics to focus on. So what do we hear actually if we are producing and if we are also just listening to music? We have an audio source. Of course, we all know the source can be, whatever you think of. It can be an audio interface. It can also be a Bluetooth speaker standing somewhere. It can be a streaming service. It can be a good streaming service. And so, of course, the quality starts with the audio source. Then we are listening through speakers. This is what we talk about today. And then we have the room. And actually, a lot of people forget about this third thing about the room, but it has a huge influence. And in the end, it's all about the sum of these three parts. This is what we listen to. And this is also how we somehow experience our mix and how we make decisions. Let's say you have a nice room, rectangular shape. So this is the most common one. If it's a square, I can already tell you it's complicated because the room modes we will talk about later, they love symmetries, and a square is, the perfect thing for room modes. So it's even harder to get a good sound in a square room. Rectangular is also not brilliant, but yeah, it will work better. So the first question a lot of people ask themselves is, where should I place myself? So where should I sit when I'm mixing and producing, and where should be my speaker setup? And here we talk about the room modes now for the first time, because they are, the bad guys, and are really, it's important to understand what they are doing. So I promise you, this is the only time in this PowerPoint where I just read out what's written there, just to give it a more, a serious context, So room modes are created when a sound wave travels between two opposite boundaries, for example, the left and right sidewalls, or the floor and ceiling. The first modal resonance occurs at the frequency where the distance between the two boundaries is equal to half a wavelength. There are further resonances at multiples of this frequency. The interferences occur at certain points, where you can always experience a minimum or a maximum. This is how I would sum it up. Room modes can make things really complicated. And I was just reading this by purpose because, of course, this is correct. And this is exactly how you define it. But this is also the reason why some people just start reading it and then they forget about it because they think, hey, I don't get it. Yeah, so it's not really my stuff. Therefore, we have nice tools. And as always, Google is really helpful in finding these. So if you just type in, for example, room mode calculator, or you can, of course, also use this MROC because this is one of the popular ones and I really like it. Just enter the dimensions of your room, and then you will see which room modes will be somehow your problem in your room. And you can, of course, also then display exactly where they happen. For all of you who are musicians, it's also sometimes interesting to see that, of course, a room mode, let's say at 70 hertz is around a D. So then you can understand if you realize, for example, I'm having a mode at D, which is, pretty strong. Some keys in my room will sound a little strange, just because then this D note will somehow, sustain longer in the room. And let's say you have a bass line, which just, excites this D, and then there is a change, a tonal change or a chord change, then this can sound a little strange. So this is sometimes the reason that people realize, okay, some songs sound better, have, for example, a more precise bass. This can be just because of the key the song is in. So just that you have seen it, usually we always talk about three different types of modes. Actually, the axial modes, so the first one on the left side, are the most important ones because they are, the strongest. And then it's tangential, also not that easy, and the so-called oblique modes. But this is just for basic information. The thing with room modes is not only that we have spots where we have full energy, so a so-called maximum, and other spots in the room where there is almost nothing. So if you would like to try this out, just use a sine wave generator, for example, with your, for example, 80 hertz or 100 hertz, and then walk around the room. And then you will realize, okay, there are spots with a lot of 100 hertz, and then there are spots where you really could think, okay, it's gone. And so you have ups and downs because of room modes. What's also happening is that the room modes ring. So the decay time of these modes and of these frequency ranges is longer. So as you can clearly see, for example, here, this is a so-called waterfall diagram. So it shows on this axis the frequencies, and then we have the level here. And then we have on the third axis, we have the time. So this one, for example, shows a time frame of 300 milliseconds. And you would see, for example, above 100, there's no sound which rings longer than 300 milliseconds. But in this range, at 70, 60, and especially below 40, the tones or the frequencies ring way longer. So this is exactly what can give you this boomy effect. So if you have a bass line, and then it can sound like ding, ding, ooh, gong, gong. Sorry for singing, but this is the easiest way to explain it. So I said, make use of this tool like the MROC, and just, for example, then select the mode. I now selected the first mode of this room. This is just 4x3 and 2.4 meters high. And this will show you, for example, maximums at both walls. So don't get confused with blue and red. The colors always show maximums. So if there is nothing, then it's a null. But the colors are always showing the maximums. This is because later on you will see there are modes which have a lot more maximums, and then it's just that you can separate these areas. Therefore, they use blue and red. So this would have a maximum here and a maximum here. In the middle of the room, there would be nothing, absolutely nothing. And if you look at the other mode, which is just, twice the frequency of the 43, you will see that we now have maximums at both walls, but also a maximum in the middle of the room. So, for example, just looking at this 40 and 80 hertz thing, we would have full 80 hertz in the middle of the room and no 40 hertz at all in the middle of the room as well. So therefore, one answer to where should I sit is not in the middle of the room, because this is, as said, a symmetrical point, which is just a problem with room modes. Of course, you will stay somehow on the middle axis of the room. This makes sense because of basic symmetry of left and right, but never be exactly in the middle of the room. A good starting position usually is in 1/3 of the room. So, for example, to the left side, or also in the, let's say, in the right side third can also work if you are, for example, talking about a home cinema or things like that. But usually these thirds make it possible that the so-called modal structure is just better. So it's a little more balanced. Yeah, you don't have full peaks and you don't have this full zero, so nothing. And this is at this third lines way better. So there are some rules there talking about, exactly 1/3. Sometimes it's 38%. You will find, different numbers there. But usually, to be in that direction is the right way to start with. And because our speakers have dip switches or can be calibrated with SAM and GLM, I place this table directly at the wall for good reasons. I will show this to you later. So you might have heard in the past, never place a speaker close to a wall. Yes and no. because there are huge disadvantages if you place it not close to the wall. And this will be shown soon. So let's say we just have our desk here, we have our speakers there. We should then, of course, always make sure, this is something some people really forget about, that we have a so-called equilateral triangle. So the same distance between the speakers and our ears. This is just, the only correct way of setting up a stereo system, because this makes sure that somehow your imaging, so if you do panorama things, will translate well to other systems. So just go for it. If you think about, for example, a classical recording of classical music, usually, they have microphone techniques called A/B, which also want to just capture the feeling of the correct panorama of the orchestra. And this, for example, translates only if you have speakers that are set up in the equilateral triangle. What's also important is the so-called acoustical axis of the speaker. And this is somehow, you just think about it as a line that shows you the direction where the speaker sums up correctly. So let's say you have a two-way system. It's a tweeter for the high frequencies, and you have the woofer, which of course also does, lower mids and bass frequencies. And of course, these have to mix because you want to listen to the complete signal, not woofer alone or tweeter alone. And therefore, we have this acoustical axis. And with two-way speakers, this is usually just exactly between the tweeter and the woofer. So for our 8000 series, for example, it's usually, at the end of the waveguide. If it's a three-way design, so some of you might know these classical designs we also have for flush mounting, it's a little different because you can imagine we will soon talk about directivity, and we have directivity in high frequencies and in mid frequencies. The bass is almost omnidirectional, and therefore the acoustical axis of a three-way system is then between the tweeter and the mid-range driver. And then, of course, we have coaxial designs, which are point sources, like the ones models, where you can see we have the tweeter in the middle, and then we have, without any gaps, the mid-range driver, and we have two oval woofers behind these openings here. And it's very easy with the ones because it's just the center. So the center of the tweeter is the acoustical axis. And because these are point sources, you can, of course, also have them horizontally. This is absolutely no problem. Can sometimes help, for example, if you're using a speaker as a center speaker and you have screens, and then it's just easier to have the speaker lying compared to vertically standing. In general, speakers should be at ear height for obvious reasons. So the acoustical axis should be at ear height. And you can go a little higher. This is sometimes useful, for example, to get some distance to reflective surfaces like consoles or also desks. But just make sure that you don't get higher than, let's say, around 15 degrees, because you will realize that, of course, our imaging is the best usually on eye level, because this is also the construction of our ears. So we are really good at this layer. And otherwise, you will realize that you will look up all the time. So if it's more than 15 degrees, you will just look into the stars instead of mixing. And of course, the best tools for that are table stands, or of course, also floor stands, wall mounts. We have all the options. A very, very, very important topic is the listening distance. And a lot of people are confused by the terminology of, for example, a near-field speaker, a mid-range speaker, or far field, and all of these things. Actually, to be honest, it's always about the ratio between direct sound and diffuse sound. So if I'm doing a mix, if I'm producing music, if I just want to listen to, let's say, hi-fi material in the best possible way, because I want to listen to the recording and not to my room, then it's always important to have more direct sound compared to the diffuse sound field. Diffuse sound field means reflections from the room. And it's just obvious that, for example, a smaller speaker like 80-20, 80-30 will not deliver enough direct sound in 5 meter distance. This is impossible just because of physics. If you want to sit away like 2, 3, 4, 5 meters, you should use a really huge speaker, to be honest. Yeah? This is the range where we then have flush mounted systems usually. If you have 40 size speakers, 30 size speakers, I would always try to be within 1 meter, to be honest. 1 meter 50 is also fine. But if it's possible for you, and then check this out, because you will get a higher precision. It will be easier for you to make decisions, and you will just reduce the level of diffuse sound that is affecting your decisions. So we have in every room a so-called critical listening distance. And of course, this is also dependent on the quality of the room. If it's a well-treated studio, with a lot of absorption, then you can sit further away. If it's an untreated room, make sure to be really close to the speaker. Because without acoustical treatment, actually the path of sound can look like this, as you can see here. Yeah. So we have a lot of reflections hitting our listening zone. And the problem with that is, of course, it's always a little later. So this is not, happening at the same time. It's all happening at different at different timings and with a different time of flight. And this, of course, changes the sound drastically. So the complete reverberation of the room is usually too long if you don't have acoustical treatment. And I will say this again later, but very important. All of these so-called time domain based things like reflections, like decay times, they are not affected by calibration at all. Absolutely not. Of course, if I reduce a room mode, for example, I have a mode at 80 Hertz, I can reduce this. So there will not be that much energy. It will also bring down the decay time a little bit. But overall, the reflections in the room will still happen. And they will still color the sound. So if you really want to get the best out of your system, it's always a combination of classical room treatment and calibration. It will never be possible that someone can just, do everything with a software. Although some, I know of some softwares sometimes giving you this flat line, but I will also show you later on that this is not the reality. So this is just a trick, a clever trick of showing things. Things are already complicated. Now we have one more problem, which is that the bass is never directive. So if we are listening to bass frequencies, the bass is always radiated omnidirectionally. So it's going everywhere. And everywhere means, of course, also it's reflected everywhere. And it's not possible to change this. A compact speaker, for example, usually gets omnidirectional already at 300 Hertz, 400 Hertz. So there's nothing you can do about this. Starting with 400-500, and then, of course, higher mids and high frequencies, they are a little more, sorry, hitting my microphone, they are a little more narrow and directive. But the things that are really causing issues are omnidirectional. So we will have to think about them exactly in that way. This is also the explanation why the position of the bass reflex port does not say anything about, where the bass somehow comes out. So an 8000 series speakers, they have the bass reflex port on the backside. This does not mean that the bass is coming out on the backside. It's omnidirectional way before that. This is just, the principle, how you design it. And for example, having the bass reflex port on the backside means that you can have a screen in front of the speaker. So, sorry, of course, not a computer screen, but let's say a cinema screen, which is just then, which really would start moving, for example, if the bass reflex port is on the front, as we have it, for example, with our older designs like 1032C. And because there, of course, is some airflow, and this can just make this move. And this is the reason for it. So bass reflex port on the backside does not mean bass only on the backside. Because the bass is omnidirectional, it will, for example, hit a wall that is close to the speaker. So let's say we have the speaker exactly at one wall, then the bass would just, be increased by up to 60 dBs. Just because, we have energy towards us, and then energy reflected from the wall. And because the distance is really small to the wall, they sum up and then just adds up. And then you have up to plus 6 dB. If you have two walls, or for example, also floor, it can be up to 12. And in the corner, it can be up to 18 dBs, which is just a huge amount of more bass. So if you just want to make sure you want to do a party with a small Bluetooth speaker and just place it in a corner of the room. It will still be a Bluetooth speaker, but you will get more bass out of it. If you are a fan of bass and you just want to relax at a party, you can just also place yourself in a corner. Might look a little strange, and some people will not talk to you anymore, but you will have a lot of bass for sure. Desks and consoles, of course, are also surfaces. They are a little smaller, and therefore they don't boost the bass. They are boosting, the lower mids, for example, usually between 130 and 250 hertz, which is a really critical frequency range if you are EQing vocals, for example, because this is exactly what defines if a vocal sounds warm or if it sounds a little hollow or thin. So this is also something that is important to understand. Therefore, for example, we have the desktop dip switches on most of our models. This is reducing exactly this boost, and then you will have a better clarity again. And now let's have a look at what I told you is so interesting about having speakers close to the wall or not close to a wall. The moment you have the speaker not at the wall, you have the direct sound from the speaker, and then you have the bass frequencies, also traveling to the wall, and there they are reflected and will add to the other signal. And what's happening then is at the wavelength of 1/4. This is just one principle of physics. If this distance is at 1/4 of a wavelength, it will cancel out this frequency. So actually, it will look like this. Starting a typical, for example, distance to the wall, a lot of people do this, is 1 meter. And 1 meter, for example, will cancel out 86 hertz. 1 meter 20, 70 hertz. 1 meter 40, 60 hertz. 1 meter 60, 50 hertz. And everything that is marked here in red is critical, if you ask me, because I would really love to have this range somehow precise and neutral, because it's really hard to make decisions on a kick drum or on the bass at all if 70 hertz are gone or if 60 hertz are gone. And this is what's happening with the so-called speaker boundary interference response. So somehow the interaction of the speaker and a surface. Of course, it's not always the wall behind the speaker. It can also be the sidewall and the floor and the ceiling. Otherwise, it would be easy. So this is what's happening there. And what you can see, what's I think pretty obvious, if we are close to the wall, for example, this 10 centimeters distance on the top of the table, then we shift this cancellation to higher frequencies. And because the speaker is already more directive in these frequencies, the dip is also not that deep, as you can see here. So we have really deep dips, for example, at 50, 60, 70, and especially even at 80, 90, it's not that deep anymore. And you can remember if it's at 800, it's absolutely acceptable. And it's no problem, for example, to place our speakers that close to a wall. The bass reflex port usually needs 5 to 10 centimeters distance, and then it's already fine and it's working. And until it gets green again, we are really, really far away. Of course, we could discuss if you would be able to have the speaker at 2 meters distance. Let's say it only affects 40 hertz, and you are working with an 8330 or 8030, which has the 45 as the lower minus 6 dB point, this would be okay. But usually it really is getting interesting at 3 meters. And I think none of us will have a room where he can have a distance of 3 meters to the walls. So therefore, just, believe me, it's just the better option to have the speakers close to the wall and then to compensate for the boosts in the bass. Because you cannot do anything about these cancellations. I will show this to you soon. We have this wonderful room mode calculators. You can also Google SBIR calculators, for example, from Mr. Tripp from Australia. And this looks pretty boring, but this is fantastic. Because once again, you can just enter the dimensions of your room. This time you can also enter the dimensions somehow of your speaker or where they are placed, so the height of the speaker. And then you will see exactly at which frequencies you get cancellations. And if you then, for example, later on see in your measurement from Room EQ Wizard, okay, this is exactly what was calculated, this is the truth, then you can play around. For example, you can change the height of the speaker. For example, sometimes people have the issue, let's say the room is 2.40 meters high, and you place the speaker at 120, then this is exactly the middle of the floor and the ceiling. And as you already know, the room modes love symmetries. So placing the speakers exactly in the middle is not ideal. And these tools are of huge help in just, finding out what's happening there. And what's also important to understand is, let's say you have your speaker, because someone told you, at 1 meter distance from the wall, and then you have an absorber behind the speaker. So also someone told you that this absorber will just compensate for the reflection from the back wall. And the absorber usually is, 20 centimeters. It won't do that because these absorbers cannot compensate for the lowest frequencies that are causing these cancellations. This is just a fact. So you can also easily try this out yourself. So what's really important, I already mentioned it, it's not possible, never, ever. Nobody on planet Earth can do that. That you can compensate for a notch in the bass range by applying EQ with positive gain. Because you have seen that we have direct sound and we have the reflected sound from the wall. If I boost, for example, 70 hertz, because there's a notch of 10 dB, let's say then I boost 70 hertz by 10 dBs, which will make your speakers go wild, I can tell you. So you will see a lot of red LEDs then. You will still also boost the reflection because the 10 dBs more 70 hertz will still be reflected and they will still cancel out. So it's not possible. And I know that there are software solutions that somehow show you before and after, and you had a deep notch, and then they apply positive gain, and then the graph says, now it's gone. This is not true. Just use Room EQ Wizard and measure yourself after calibration. It's not possible. The only way to deal with that is to find a better placement of the speaker or to use acoustical treatment that is effective in that range. What is possible, that you can compensate for boosts, and this is exactly what we do. So if we place the speaker close to the wall and the bass, of course, is boosted in that range, we can compensate for that just by using filters. And we can also compensate for the positive gain of a mode at our listening position. So if, for example, there's a boost caused by a modal frequency of 5, 6, 7, 8 dBs at a certain frequency, we can reduce this with a filter. And this is also somehow then, of course, the higher flexibility of SAM, because unfortunately your dip switches on your analog Genelec speakers, they only do the basics. So you can just bring down the bass. But of course, there's no dip switch for 60 hertz or for 80 hertz or for 90 hertz. And sometimes you would need this. So this is the main difference. You can just, do an overall better tonal balance with the dip switches. But if it's about high precision and even more clarity, especially in the bass range, then the DSP filters, of course, of the SAM models are way more flexible. And just to prove what I have said now, this is a calibration from the room. So if you remember what I have shown you in the beginning, this was the room EQ wizard measurement. This is the GLM measurement. And you can clearly see, for example, we have these boosts. This is the red curve. And then we have the blue curve showing the filters that are applied by GLM to compensate for these boosts. And what you can see here, we have a little amount of positive gain, just also with a wide, wide Q. It's not narrow, and only a small amount to just do the overall tonal balance. But you see the green curve, which is the resulting one, still, of course, shows a dip here, because this is my floor reflection, and I cannot do anything about that. I will have to live with that, or I would just have to move, or ask my wife if I can get a better room in our, in our nice flat. But this is, the reality. And if a solution, for example, now would show you a flat line here after it was measured like this, then I would really, of course, yes, I think I can say this. I would say this is not correct. Then it's about, measuring multiple points and doing some kind of an, average thing at different spots. But if you are measuring a single point thing at your position where you are sitting, then you should still see this dip. Because from time to time, of course, people ask me if I now would use another software which has more positive gain filters, because you at Genelec, you don't have that many positive gain filters. And wouldn't that be cool? And I tell them no, because it's just not working. It's just not working. And the positive gain filters we use are really only for balancing things. Yeah, they are not, also they cannot somehow, make physics not valid anymore. This is just a fact. So where should I place my speakers? I think you now can answer this yourself. If the speakers offer the option to compensate for bass boost, and usually every studio monitor should have this option, it's always a good way to start with place them close to the front wall, because you will then just avoid cancellations from the front wall. Other options, of course, is to place speakers far away, more than 2 meters. This can also work if you have a larger room. Of course, that's perfectly fine. I'm also a fan of, larger studios. But talking about larger studios, what I did not mention here, because unfortunately it's not happening that often anymore. Of course, the best way to place a speaker is in the wall. So flush mounting is still physically the best thing, because then there is no front wall. The speaker does not see a front wall. So if you have the chance to flush mount your speakers, this is, of course, always the best thing. If you're using subwoofers, always also make sure that they are placed, of course, on the floor and close to the wall. And what's really cool about subwoofers, I mentioned that, for example, I am struggling here with a floor reflection for my speaker, causing a cancellation. Because a subwoofer is placed on the floor, it does not have the problem with the floor reflection. The floor is so close to the subwoofer that it also just adds up, and it will just boost it a little, but it's not doing a cancellation. This does mean, for example, that you have a higher flexibility now for placing your speakers if you're using a sub. Let's say you found the best placement for your sub and it gives you this curve. I would be really happy with that, because this would be really linear from 20 hertz up to almost 100. And my speakers would measure like this. So you can see I have a dip here at 90, 80, 70 hertz. Then I could use bass management and, for example, choose a crossover like 85 or even higher. And then this notch of the speaker would just be compensated by the subwoofer. Then it's done. So this sometimes can be a huge thing. For example, let's say you have a really larger console or also a larger desk, or sometimes also in video studios, I have seen that, because they have a lot of screens, and the speakers, just if they are placed at the wall, they are really far away. And it would be better, for example, to have them closer to you, which would mean then there are, let's say, 1 meter distance. And then a subwoofer can be the perfect solution for that, because the subwoofer will just take care of the notch that is caused by the cancellation of the speakers. Some components for acoustical treatment. As said, I cannot go too much into the details, but I think the basic understanding is essential. And then please, of course, always contact, all of these guys and girls who are specialized in it, who call themselves acousticians, or also just doing acoustical treatment and modules and things. I have to mention here GIK, for example, because they are really doing a great job. The stuff is really inexpensive, and they provide, this is the main thing, what I like about them, they provide really good service. So you can just send them your measurements from Room EQ Wizard or from our grade report, and then they will just, help you with configuring the right devices or the right modules for your room. They also always show where the treatment is really doing something, so you can see where it is effective. This is, for example, one of their bass traps, and you can see it's most effective starting at around 250 and then approximately down to 90. So although this is a really huge bass trap, you can clearly see, unfortunately, nothing is happening here below 80. Nothing. And this is because still, you remember this 1/4 of a wavelength thing. This is also true for absorbers. So you will need the depth of 1/4 of the wavelength of the frequency you want to somehow absorb or reduce. And this actually means that even at 100 hertz, you would need approximately 90 centimeters depth. If it's about 20 hertz, it's 4 meters. So not that practical. And to prove this, and some of you might be interested in just building their own absorbers. Also, once again, a really cool tool. It's called acoustic modeling, and where you can just enter the materials you're using with the so-called flow resistivity, and then this will show you also where this absorber will be effective, and even more important, where it will not be effective. Bass traps should always be placed where somehow there is, of course, a lot of bass. So usually in the corners. You can, of course, also use air gaps, which makes them usually even more effective. And it can also help with, taking care that you don't get humidity behind it. I had this once. It was, a cold wall in the wintertime, and then there was humidity behind it. And, when I just removed it, it was a little greenish then, but not the Genelec green. So you can easily avoid this with using air gaps. This is also true for all absorbers. They will just be a little more effective then. And classically, usually you have them in the corners, but of course you can also place them in the corners, let's say, for example, between the walls and the ceiling. This is what's shown here. If you want to tune something, or if you really have a specific frequency that is causing you problems, let's say one room mode is really an issue, then there are so-called tunable bass traps, or usually also bass traps with membranes. They also have usually porous material, like, for example, stone wool or glass wool, or also some foams, things like that. Although foam is usually only used for the classical absorbers. And then somehow the membrane is just dampening this specific frequency. So you can see, for example, the red curve here shows the so-called range limiter option with the membrane, and the blue curve shows the full range thing. And it's interesting to see, because the range limiter is then very effective at one specific frequency at 80 hertz, but it's performing not that well at other frequencies compared to the full range thing. So usually this is why if you ask someone who is really experienced, they work with combinations of that. So they start with a lot of broadband absorption to bring down the reflections, and to also bring down the reverberation time of your room. And then you can look at specific frequencies as well. The good thing is, because now that everything below 100 usually is tricky and it's really expensive, especially in these frequency ranges, a SAM system can do a great job. Because for us, it's no problem, for example, to reduce 40 hertz by 10 dBs. For a bass trap, 10 dBs at 40 hertz is it's a challenge. Yeah. So even with these so-called active bass traps that are really popular, they usually bring it down by 3 or 4 dBs, and then you will usually have multiples of them. And so this is actually everything below the 100 hertz. It's really worth looking at what you can do with calibration from the speaker side. And just that you've seen it, I don't know, some of you might be able to build a studio like that. There are, of course, also other constructions like the so-called Helmholtz resonators, which just have openings, and then somehow the cavity, so the volume with the air, is acting as a so-called spring. So these are called mass spring systems. So usually it's a moving mass, and it's just dampened by a spring. That's the construction. Yeah, but as said, usually the budgets for these things are a little higher. We had so many issues with the bass, and now it's getting a little easier with the higher frequencies, the upper mid-range and the heights. These are also reflected, so they will also somehow cause cancellations. But this is a little different, just the way we listen to it and we hear it. We will experience so-called comp filtering, which just means that you will have a result as shown here. This looks a little similar to a comp. This is why it's called comp filtering. And it sounds really as if you would just play around with an EQ setting. You can also try this out if you have a flat surface and just change the angle when you are recording with a microphone, for example. And then you can easily hear what comp filtering is. And of course, we should avoid this. So we should avoid reflections to the listening zone. In general, they happen. For example, especially if you have a window next beside to you, then it would make sense to have, for example, a curtain, or just close the window and mount an absorber, because this will just kill this reflection. Or this is the reason why you see so many non-parallel walls in professional studios. If you don't have these rectangular angles, it's also easier that the reflection is just not reaching the listening zone anymore. Early reflections can also be measured with, for example, Room EQ Wizard. This is now an example from our room acoustic report. I can show it to you a little later. On the left side, you would see this is a well-controlled thing. There's only one stronger reflection. So this 0 is the direct sound. And for example, we would have something reaching us with minus 10 dBs compared to the direct sound at approximately 3 milliseconds. Compared to that, this is, for example, an untreated living room. And then you see there are a lot more reflections. And all of these will cause coloration. The good thing is now that if it's about the mid frequencies and high frequencies, things don't have to be that thick anymore. So finally, we can use the easier stuff. For example, something with 10 centimeters is usually doing a perfect job. You can also just look up where they are effective. And as you can see, these models would start at approximately 400-500 hertz and then just going up. But of course, this is not a bass trap. Nothing's happening here. And absorbers usually should, of course, be placed at the so-called early reflection points. You might know this wonderful thing that's just sit down and someone, with a mirror is just, walking along the wall. And the moment you see the speaker, this is the early reflection point. You can do it like this, of course. And otherwise, also make sure that you just, to be honest, if you have place left at your walls, place absorbers there. It's always a good thing about the complete, diffusion and about, not diffusion, about the complete reduction of the diffuse sound field. So it's perfectly fine to have more of them, not only at the early reflection points. For example, GIK is also usually using broadband absorbers then at the other end of the room as well, just to further reduce the reverberation time in this range. And of course, always don't forget the ceiling. The ceiling is also a reflective surface and usually can be treated quite easily with standard absorbers. So if I would like to create a so-called sonic reference, So something I could rely on, which would make it easier for me to create mixes and produce music that will just translate well to other systems as well. First point is treat your room acoustically as good as possible. So if you have some money left, just spend it. It's really useful. Of course, the speakers are the most important thing always, but the room acoustics, to be honest, are absolutely important as well. Yeah. So make sure that you get some good basic treatment with bass traps, with absorbers. You don't need diffusers right from the start. Diffusers usually, are used for scattering reflections. Can be very useful. Let's say you have a small booth and you want to record drums, and it just should not sound like a small booth. Then a diffuser would be a really good option. But otherwise, I would always start with broadband absorption. This is just to give you a better starting point. Then, of course, measure and evaluate the results. This is very essential. And as said, you can do it with Room EQ Wizard or with GLM. And then optimize the playback system for your listening position. It's also just a fact that if you start doing multi-point measurements, it's always a compromise. So let's say, for example, you measure 1 point and the other point is 1 meter away or 1.5 meters or 2 meters away. It's so different somehow from the frequency response that if you then do a compromise of these 2 points, the end result at your main point will be not that good anymore. So this is why we usually recommend starting with a single point. And even if we do multi-point, usually let's do something like 0.5 meter distance to the main point. Otherwise, yeah, it's just not that effective anymore. And as I said, you can use the dip switches or you can use then GLM. And because we spoke about, room acoustics, I still think one of the best things we invented in the last years is this wonderful grade report, which is just based on the sweeps we record with GLM. And it's somehow like someone doing Room EQ Wizard for you, and then someone is doing all of the paperwork. So, copy pasting the diagrams and then writing a text about it and then just evaluating what you could do. And you just get this within 2 minutes. The so-called Genelec room acoustic data evaluation report. And after the calibration, just click on, order the grade. And then, for example, for a stereo system, it's approximately 25 to 30 pages. If it's an immersive system, it can be more than 100 pages. And it will show you the complete image, not only the frequency responses you already know from GLM, but also the time domain, time frequency domain, and also some studio standards. So how does your system, for example, perform if it should be part of an ITU compliance setup? And just to show you, 3 parts of it, I already have shown this before. The early reflection thing is very useful because you can easily then find out, okay, the moment, for example, I place an absorber on the left side, it looks way better. Early versus late, this is what I told you about, how close you should sit to the speaker. And this is also wonderful to see where your treatment is effective. This is a measurement from the really nice project studio of my colleague Andy Bensley from England. And you can clearly see he has a really wide corridor. So the green line is the direct sound, and the red line is the diffuse sound, the late sound from the room. And you can clearly see this corridor is huge here because his treatment, so his panels get effective at approximately 5 to 600 hertz. And then, there's a huge difference between reflected sound and direct sound. And still, it's absolutely okay because the red curve is below the green one, even below 100. If you look at this one, this is once again an untreated room. You can clearly see below 100, you are listening to the room. There's way more, late sound than the direct sound. And up to, let's say, 6, 7, 8K, it's always the same level and even higher sometimes. So you could not make reliable decisions here. You can do it here. And then the so-called waterfall diagram, once again, which is also shown which is really helpful to see how long certain frequencies ring in the room. For example, this one is also really cleaned up above 100 compared to this one. Untreated room, a lot of things going on above 100 as well. You can see both, for example, would have the same mode here in the bass. This is just not treated in that room. There is no bass treatment, doing this. And then, as mentioned, because I talked about Room EQ Wizard that often, please just, watch on our YouTube channel the so-called Room EQ Wizard and Dip Switches Explained video. This is exactly what the title says. And then we have a second one, which is about adjusting the subwoofer phase and level. Some people also struggle with that. And this is essential because if you don't have the correct alignment, the crossover section between subwoofer and speakers will never be neutral and linear. And that's the issue. So for example, the subwoofer will be too loud, or if the phase setting is not correct, then they will always have a notch in the region of the crossover. And therefore, just use, these nice tutorials. And actually what you need is only the freeware, a computer, of course, an audio interface. I think most of you have this. And you will have to get, and now it's in bold, an entry-level measurement microphone. You don't have to pay 2,000 euros for a measurement microphone. Actually, there was a really nice comparison of someone who just had microphones around 50 euros. I don't name any. You will find them yourself. And it was compared with really expensive ones. And the difference in the range where we are looking at was around a dB or half of a dB. So it was bass and lower mids. Because this is also something I forgot to mention, I will do it now. We are always just looking at the bass and the lower mids. So usually everything below 500. GLM also is doing nothing, no filters from GLM for the upper mids and high frequencies, just because, the wavelengths are short. They are really short there. And a movement of my head like this would already change the situation. So if I would filter there, and once again, others do this, if you really apply filters at 5K, 7K, 8K, or even 10K, 10K is 3 centimeters something. You move like this and it's not correct anymore. So don't do this. Always just focus on the bass range and the lower mids. So usually for the, physics here below the Schröder frequency. This is where it's interesting. Then we have, of course, video tutorials about GLM5. There's a complete walkthrough video where you can listen to me explaining it in half of an hour. and you, of course, you are allowed to skip parts you already know, and there are chapters. And because I'm a huge fan of the Great Report, there's also a video about this as well. And all of the basics I talked about today are part of our monitor setup guide, and you can find this on the website. If you go for Academy and then catalogs and guides, this is the so-called monitor setup guide. You can also Google for it. And mentioning the websites, if you are not aware of it, we have different language versions available. So you can, of course, start with Genelec.com and select your language, or you can directly use FISE in Spanish now. Yeah, also done mainly by my assistant of today. And then we have Japan and we have China and also German. If you find some funny things on the German page, just blame me and just let me know. I did my best. Cool. And this is the end of this presentation. And of course, it was a little longer, as always. But still, I think we have enough time, of course, now to check your questions. So I will just switch back here. Yeah, perfect. Wonderful. I will just bring this up. Yeah, because now it's easier for me to read it. And it's really getting dark now. I'm sorry for that. I should have checked the lighting. It's really dark. How to eliminate 70 to 80 hertz dip in frequency? As explained, Michal, try to find out where it's coming from. Usually it's a front wall reflection. So I would just start with bringing the speaker close to the wall, measure again. Otherwise, if the speaker is already there, I would move the microphone, let's say 1 meter further away, to see what is changing. If it's a problem at your listening position, and then perhaps you could adjust this with changing the listening position. Otherwise, 70 to 80 hertz. Of course, you could also use bass trapping, but don't expect wonders. Yeah. So this usually would mean that you will have to treat the complete wall with something that kills this reflection. So I would start with close to the wall, measure again, move microphone, measure, and then try to find what's going on. Lars. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. He was just, I think you can all read it. Because it's a stereo system, yeah, that the complete interaction of speakers is then a little different. You can, of course, still what I was talking about. Of course, let's say these two speakers would play back modal frequency. Of course, it will still generate this modal thing in the room. There's nothing you can do about this. But usually you are absolutely right. And I said, we have to sit somewhere. And if we start sitting, off axis from the room middle axis, then we are getting more issues with the sidewalls and things like that. Yeah, this is a question by Anders just about, vibrations caused by the sub on the floor. To be honest, this shouldn't be the case. Hopefully it's not a Genelec sub, because our subs don't do this. It's of course perfectly fine then to play some rubber material or things like that. If you're asking, for example, 6 centimeters, this is nothing. So I was only telling you that, for example, I had one guy having the subwoofer at 1 meter or 1.50 meters, then it can cause a problem with the cancellation of the floor. 6 centimeters or something like that is no problem at all. Just do this. And what I also forgot to mention, sometimes, to be honest, it can make sense to turn the subwoofer towards the wall. This is also sometimes an option that you can check out. Then you will also only have to make sure that you have 10 centimeters between, the driver and so the front of the subwoofer and the wall. But sometimes this can give you better results in some rooms. Left, right. Yeah, this is a very good question. Usually this is also very often a topic with hi-fi customers. To be honest, our speakers should be pointed directly to the ears. This is, how they are designed and how they work best. And especially, for example, if you ever had the chance to listen to the ones, you might have realized that the sweet spot is so wide that it doesn't make any difference, if you are, let's say, 10 degrees off or 15 degrees off even. Yeah. So that's fine. This originally comes from that if, let's say, the waveguide is not really good, and sometimes then you have directivity issues, so that the frequencies are so narrow that it just can cause listening fatigue, for example, if it's pointing directly towards your ears. And this was their trick from the past. If you just angle the speakers a little outside, then it does not hit your ears directly. But of course, this is not how it should be. You can do this of course, if you like to, you can do this at home. But if I'm mixing and producing, so the professional context, just always angle them towards your ears. And Esther, I think it will be available. I think it will be available. I'm usually not a fan of it because then at some point, sometimes I have to look look at myself again. Yeah, but I think it will be available. Yeah, I'm pretty sure on YouTube for sure, and I think the other platforms will also just have a link to it. Probably. Cool, great. No more questions. Yeah, hopefully. Then it was I did answer most of them during the presentation. Yeah, then thanks a lot for being with us. It was a pleasure, and always feel free to reach out to us. As said, just use support@genelec.com or support.usa@genelec.com, and yeah, we are always happy to assist you in just evaluating what's going on. If you're just thinking about what system could be the best for me for my room size. If you are interested in immersive stuff, for example, how to do a Dolby Atmos setup, we can also assist you with that. We are using the Dolby Atmos room design tool to just then calculate what speakers would be the best match. Yeah, and otherwise, just have a nice evening, a nice day wherever you are. Okay, there's one more question. Andrew. Perfect. Yeah, Andrew, to be honest, of course, I would just recalibrate it because every room is a little different. But I think it should be no issue if you just start working with them as they are now. That's perfectly fine. Cool. And then once again, have a nice evening, have a nice day, and it was great that you had been with us. And all the best. See you soon. Bye. Hi all. If you want to find out more about our new 9320A SAM reference controller and how to configure it with the Genelec Loudspeaker Manager software GLM5, please check out our video on the Genelec YouTube channel.